Every wide receiver in this video, we're going to tell you whether to start or sit them this week, and we're going to go through every single matchup, starting with the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers. Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel for the Washington Commanders. Obviously, this is the Thursday night game. It's going to be a high-scoring game, so the Vegas lights are going to be yellow and green, respectively, for these two teams. Obviously, you're going to want to start some pieces in this game. But in terms of matchup, Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel have the tougher matchup here because the Packers last year allowed the fifth least amount of points to wide receivers in fantasy football. Plus, you also have the Week 1 data that we already have. And you saw what they did to Amon-Ra St. Brown, to Jamison Williams. I mean, Isaac Tesla is the guy that had a touchdown there last week. And so just based off last year's sample and the 1 week sample size we have for this year, it is going to be a tougher matchup for both Terry and Deebo Samuel. Now, Terry, I think you've got to put Terry as a start for this week. Still, you have to keep him in your lineup. We're going to keep him in the C tier. Deebo, I'm going to give a meh this week, even though Deebo looked dynamite. I honestly, if you lean start for Deebo Samuel, I don't blame you. If you do that, you're probably thinking that Terry's still going to get acclimated after missing most of camp. And so I would say Deebo Samuel somewhere between start and meh. It is a tough matchup again, and the Packers are very good. And so it is important to keep that in mind if you have other flex options like running backs this week for those guys. On the Green Bay side, Jaden Reed, we're going to put in the H tier, and Romeo Doubs, we're going to put in the H tier right now because we can't really figure out who the wide receiver one there is. The wide receiver utilization for fantasy right now for the Green Bay Packers is not ideal. Again, they're using all of these 5-6 different guys. They got Malik Heath in there. Matthew Golden ran the most amount of routes on that team last week and actually had 2 targets. So you just don't know. Matthew Golden is a sit this week. I don't think you can start him. Romeo Doubs, I would also say, is a sit. Jaden Reed, I would say, is a meh this week. Again, you really don't know if you're going to ever get any fantasy production from these guys. And so these Packers wide receivers, even though the matchup light is yellow, the Washington Commanders have a decent secondary as well, the 10th least amount of points to wide receivers over last year in week 1. And so, again, with this matchup in particular, it is a high-scoring matchup, but the problem is it's a tough matchup for Washington, and Green Bay has 6 different receivers they like to throw to. Good luck trying to flex guys from this game. Really, the only must-start player from this game is probably Terry McLaurin, and even Terry at this point we saw last week can be hit or miss.
So moving over to the Cleveland and Baltimore game, this one actually gets pretty interesting. It looks ugly at face value because you're like, okay, Cleveland really shut down Cincinnati last week, a game that we expected to be really high scoring. I mean, you're looking historically over the course of last season, not just factoring in last week. Cleveland has allowed like the 4th most amount of points to wide receivers, and you would expect, again, a pretty solid week from Zay Flowers, maybe even an upside shot with Rashad Bateman if you're struggling in your flex this week with injuries. But I will say with the showing that Cleveland had in week 1 against Cincinnati, you might be a little bit worried about anyone beyond Zay Flowers starting at the wide receiver position. Bateman's already a coin toss week in and week out, whether he's going to drop 12 plus or less than 5 points. So I think with Zay Flowers, again, green matchup and a green Vegas slate, this is expected to be a higher scoring game for the wide receivers. But I think outside of that, again, D-Hop had a touchdown last week. We're not counting on that. Again, he didn't have a ton of target share. So Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman are both curious as well. Again, same matchup here. I think both of these guys had the same amount of target volume, target opportunity. Tillman was just able to get the touchdown there, and Jerry Jeudy was more efficient in terms of yardage with his usage. So I do think he has the higher floor this week. If you're deciding between the two and you own both, I would definitely favor Jerry Jeudy over Cedric Tillman. And then again, in Cleveland at the wide receiver position, we're not really looking at anybody else after that.
Moving on to the Jacksonville-Cincinnati Bengals game. Obviously, both Brian Thomas and Jamar Chase, 2 guys that we are going to have in the S and A tier respectively, both of those guys had slow starts to their season last week, and so we're going to look for bounce-back games from these elite wide receivers. Brian Thomas, of course, is still going to be a start. You have to start Brian Thomas, and he's probably going to bounce back. Travis Hunter, still a start. Loved the target volume. Needs more yards. Needs another big play. Needs a touchdown. But other than that, he should be fine. De'Ami Brown, obviously, is somebody that we're going to have to put in these rankings as well. When you're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver room as a whole, De'Ami Brown last week had 8.5 points, so he actually had as many points as Travis Hunter, who had 9 points. And when you're looking at Brian Thomas Jr., he had 9 points as well. And so those guys really did split their production. In terms of De'Ami Brown, though, we're not comfortable putting him as a start. He's going to be a sit for this week. On the other side of the ball here, Cincinnati, Jamar Chase, of course, we don't even have to talk about this one. T. Higgins, we really don't have to talk about as well, and there's not a viable wide receiver 3 option in Cincinnati. In terms of the matchups, though, Cincinnati has all green lights for this week. It should be a better matchup for Chase and Higgins. When you're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they allowed the 9th most amount of points to wide receivers over last year. And then in week 1, of course, they didn't have a ton going against them with Tedero McMillan had, I think, 11 points in that game. Obviously, Xavier Legette didn't do much in that game either. And so we have a small sample size this year, but it should be a good matchup for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and their Vegas light is also green. So all yellows for the Jags, and you got to start the top 2 guys. All greens for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins here. And so a game, again, that actually probably it looks like this will be a higher scoring game as well. And I think your top 2 wide receivers on each team you are definitely starting this week.
Dallas has a nice matchup against New York this week, the New York Giants. Obviously, the Giants started really slow with Russell Wilson at the helm. We'll see long-term who ends up actually being the starter there or at the quarterback position for the Giants. But for all intents and purposes, we're not panicking with Malik Neighbors. He has, again, a solid matchup against Dallas. That secondary is... Again, not gonna. It's not that great. Dallas has allowed the 7th most amount of points to wide receivers over the last calendar year, and we're definitely gonna go must start for Malik Neighbors. Must start with CeeDee Lamb, both of these guys, and George Pickens as well. Again, going up against the Giants secondary here, you've got a yellow matchup, a green for offense and green for Vegas. This is one where we're expecting probably the majority of the production coming on the Dallas side, because as much as Dallas gets criticism heading into this season, like they do have objectively the better offense here. I would count on CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens both being very viable, productive options this week. And I'll go meh with Wan'Dale Robinson. Honestly, Wan'Dale, if you ended up for whatever reason having to flex him week 1, he didn't let you down. He had 11.5 points, 8 targets, 6 receptions for 55 yards. Again, in a matchup against Washington that is going to be just as friendly, if not less friendly, than the matchup against Dallas here. So even though the quarterback room is not great, it's not ideal. Russell Wilson throwing you the ball and being the second option in that offense, which just doesn't look great at the moment. If you have to start Wan'Dale Robinson for whatever reason, then I'll go meh there. I don't think he's a you have to sit him type of guy.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Let's go to the Chicago-Detroit game, another NFC North matchup here, and start with Chicago. It's a good matchup for Chicago, and so we are going to start Rome Odunze, who was the leading target getter for the Chicago Bears last week, and we are still going to start DJ Moore. I think you've got to give DJ Moore another week in your lineup to perform, and I think he probably will have that week this week against Detroit. They have the 2nd most points allowed to wide receivers last year and through week 1, and so again, I think it's a decent matchup. I think you got to start both these guys, and we're not even going to put any wide receiver 3 on the graphic. If anything, it would be Zacchaeus that would be on here, and I actually would go ahead and put him on here as a meh, because he has looked good in the preseason. He has looked good in the season now, and I think that, honestly, he is a streamable guy at times in fantasy football. Last week, I think he had 8 points. He had 8.2 points last. I said 7 targets though, and so again, 28-year-old Olamide. Is that how you say it? Olamide Zacchaeus. I don't even know how to say his first name.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's Olamide.
Someone will correct you. Don't worry.
Correct in the comments. So he is somewhat streamable this week. And then on the other side of the ball, it's a tougher matchup for Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown, though, you have to start. Jameson Williams, I'm going to put as a meh this week. When you're looking at the Chicago Bears last year, they allowed the least amount of points to wide receivers of any team. This was a tough matchup every week for different guys. When you're looking at what the Chicago Bears did last week, Justin Jefferson salvaged his day with the touchdown, and nobody else there was productive. Nobody. And so I do think Jameson Williams is more of a shaky start this week. I do think, again, we have a long track record of this Chicago Bears defense in this secondary being pretty stingy in terms of allowing points to fantasy football wide receivers. It is a decent divisional matchup, though, and so we have that going for us. It's just a much better matchup for the Chicago side than it is the Detroit side in terms of opposing defenses.
So next matchup here is really, really ugly, honestly, for the most part. We're going to recommend that you stay away from it right now. We've got Tyreek Hill in the D tier, and he's really going to be the highlight. We're not necessarily panicking about Tyreek Hill, saying he's going to do absolutely nothing this year, is going to be a bust. I think he'll have some good games. I don't know how good a game against New England is going to be, again, in an offense in Miami that looks like it's kind of in shambles right now. And Tyreek Hill, again, is just not – it looks like he's picking up where he left off at the end of last season, which is not a positive thing really at all. We are going to have him in the D tier, though. He's pretty much the only guy that we're like, yeah, you still need to start Tyreek Hill unless you just are absolutely loaded at wide receiver. But I will say for everybody else, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 2 in Miami. Jalen Waddle also picked up right where he left off last season and the season before that. Jalen Waddle just has such a low floor. He is such an ugly start right now in an offense that has gotten worse and worse every single year under Mike McDaniel. And again, a tough matchup against New England, who allowed the 13th most amount of points to wide receivers last season. But again, this has been revamped by Mike Vrabel. So yeah, D tier and G tier respectively for Hill and Waddle heading into this week. And then Diggs, Boutte, and Demario Douglas. I mean, you look at the production for every single one of these guys in week 1. And if I were to come into week 2 and tell you that I knew who was going to be the top option there, I would be lying to you. Boutte had a 16-pointer. Diggs had an 11-pointer. Douglas had an 8-pointer. Douglas had 7 targets. Diggs had 7 targets. Kayshon Boutte had 8 targets. I mean, this is looking like it's pretty evenly spread out among all 3 of these guys. Whoever's going to get the touchdown, I guess, is going to be the most productive. But Douglas had the touchdown last week, and he wasn't the most productive because Boutte was the most efficient with his usage. All that to say, am I excited about starting any of these guys? No, I'm not at all. But if you have to start one of them, I understand because of the investment that you took on Stephon Diggs in the 7th round at the beginning of the season. I'm going to go mez for every single one of these guys. Diggs, Boutte, and Douglas. I don't think any of them are going to really let you down and lay like a goose egg this week, but honestly, I just question the ceiling of every single one of them in a matchup that is going to be really, really tough against Miami, we would suspect. So again, Miami doesn't look great this year, but their defense has historically been pretty solid against opposing wide receivers. And while Pittman had a solid week and Warren had a solid week to start the season against Miami, we need to see it for a few more weeks before we really move Miami down significantly when it comes to that defensive matchup.
If all of this information is a lot to digest for you, we totally understand. What we're doing for our season pass holders with Code Domain is sending them an algorithm for their team every single week with all of the lights for their specific matchup and their recommended lineup based on our rankings and our Vegas Lights algorithm that we have created. And so you can unlock yours if you join with the season pass with Code Domain. You get our rest of season rankings, our weekly rankings, our trade calculator, all of our in-season tools on the site. Plus, you're going to get that weekly algorithm for your specific roster and team so that you can set your lineup, and it's going to be easy for you every week. So again, if you check it out, the season pass with Code Domain, I've got the link pinned in the comment. It's $30 for the entire year, and it's going to unlock you that weekly lineup decision-making thing that we put out for you guys. So check it out in the link below. But let's go to the San Francisco-New Orleans game now. It's a good matchup for San Francisco. New Orleans allowed the 8th most amount of points to fantasy wide receivers. However, there is only one wide receiver you can start in this game, and that's Ricky Pearsall. Juwan Jennings in week 1 had 3.5 points, and he's considered day-to-day right now with an injury. He's not practiced. There's no way I'm starting Juwan Jennings this week. He is a must-sit for us. Ricky Pearsall, of course, being a must-start. And then Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed on the other side of the ball. I'm going to start Chris Olave, obviously. You saw the targets last week. We're very encouraged about that. Rashid Shaheed, I think he's a meh. He could be a flex play this week if you need him to. He's in the H tier for us. Chris Olave is in the F tier, and then we have Ricky Pearsall in the D tier. And again, it's a tough matchup for New Orleans. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, obviously, the 49ers allowed the 3rd least amount of points to fantasy wide receivers last year. But Chris Olave is going to get all the target volume there, and Rashid Shaheed, I do think, is going to still get enough targets. This is a team that throws the ball. I mean, they threw the ball 40 times in week 1, and so definitely something to keep in mind. Different strength of matchups there, but we do have Ricky Pearsall and Chris Olave being starts for us this week.
Look, I'm not going to bet on the Jets allowing the same amount of points that they did week 1 under a brand new head coach, a brand new defensive play caller, and Aaron Glenn. They still have Sauce Gardner. They still are going to be pretty locked down when it comes to the wide receivers in the Buffalo Bills wide receiver room. Shakir and Coleman, we are this week going to have them both in the same tier, even though Coleman outproduced everybody else in that offense by quite a significant margin in week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens. I don't think either of us are betting on another 40-plus point game for the Bills and the Jets this week. Again, we could be wrong. It's Josh Allen. He can just will his team to scoring 40-plus points every single week if he wants to. But again, this week we're going to be conservative, have these guys both in the G tier. I'm going to have them both as meh because I really do think it's a toss-up between the two of them. Shakir's going to be your floor play, and Coleman's going to be your upside play. And you saw that last week. You've seen this over the entire course of Khalil Shakir's career. Coleman will be on his way up our rankings, though, I think in future weeks if he continues this really solid production and potentially establishes himself as the top wide receiver for Josh Allen. And then looking at the flip side here, you got the Jets with Garrett Wilson. He's a must start from here on out, effective immediately. Like you can't sit Garrett Wilson. He's getting too much target volume. There's no one else outside of that. We didn't even rank Josh Reynolds this week because there is no viable wide receiver option beyond Garrett Wilson. That's why Garrett Wilson is so productive in this offense. Justin Fields and Wilson have had a nice little pairing in week 1 against Pittsburgh, which was a tougher matchup. And again, when you're looking at the Buffalo Bills, they actually allowed the 13th least amount of points to wide receivers. So am I expecting a crazy huge week for Garrett Wilson against Buffalo like Zay Flowers had in week 1? I don't think he'll be able to replicate that. He'll get his own target volume, but we are going to be, again, conservative with Garrett Wilson as well and put him in the B tier.
The Seattle-Pittsburgh game, it does project to be one of the lower scoring games of the week, and the matchups are yellow lights for both of these teams. So when you're looking at Seattle first, Jackson Smith and Jigba, it's, again, yellow matchup for him, yellow offense. The Vegas line, again, is a little bit lower for these teams, but JSN's a must start. Obviously, we have him in the A tier. Cooper Kupp, somebody that I'm going to say is a sit this week. I'm not starting Cooper Kupp until he shows me that he's actually going to produce, and I didn't think he was going to produce this season. He didn't produce in week 1. I'm sitting Cooper Kupp. Again, in terms of the matchup, it's Pittsburgh. Like, it's probably going to be a tougher game anyways. On the Pittsburgh side of the ball, though, DK Metcalf you have to start, I think. And then, honestly, Calvin Austin is another guy we're going to add to the I tier in this week's rankings, and I have him as a meh play this week. We have him, again, in the I tier with guys like Josh Downs, guys like Adam Thielen, and then guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, other guys we have rated as mehs for this week. And so I do think Calvin Austin can be streamable, and I'm going to want to see multiple weeks of production. I'm not starting him in the flock league by any means, but I do think that he's somebody you're going to have to consider as a flex play option. In deeper leagues, you might be flexing Calvin Austin this week. Again, this is a mediocre matchup across the board with mediocre Vegas lines as well, but definitely starting the alphas in this matchup this week.
Yeah, then with the Rams, we're going to keep it simple here. Puka Nacua is an S tier wide receiver from here on out, barring injury. Devontae Adams, I think even though he started a little bit slow in his first game with the LA Rams, he still had enough target volume and enough production that, again, it wasn't like anything that was backbreaking. I think you got to flex Devontae Adams pretty comfortably this week. I'm starting both of these guys. Going up against Tennessee, who, this is a tough matchup. I will admit that, they allowed the second least amount of points to wide receivers last season. They have a very good secondary. I'm still definitely starting Puka, and I'm still looking to probably flex Devontae Adams. So on the flip side, Calvin Ridley is still effectively the wide receiver 1 there. I will say I want to highlight Alec Manor, who we have ranked in the I tier this week. He had 7 targets in his debut as a rookie option for Cam Ward. So that's something to keep your eyes on, I think, long-term for the Tennessee Titans down the road. He might be a potential flexible option. But again, this is not one that I'm really gonna bet on Tennessee and say, hey, I'm cool starting both of these guys when they couldn't really do jack or really produce at a high level at all. In week 1, and Cam Ward looked quite a bit shaky. Callahan's play calling was questionable. So we need Tennessee to show a little bit more consistent production before we're comfortable starting anyone beyond Alec, which is why we're going to have anyone beyond Calvin Ridley, like Alec. And then for Calvin Ridley specifically, we are going to have him in the F tier this week. He's kind of a solid flex option if you need to put him in there. Moving
to the Carolina-Arizona game now, we've got Teteroa McMillan, of course, as a start this week in the C tier, and Xavier Legette we have as a sit. He's in the K tier. In terms of the matchup, it's a decent matchup for both of these teams. Not good, not bad necessarily. The Vegas line obviously favors Arizona in this game by quite a lot, and so because of that, Marvin Harrison's going to be a start. But outside of that, really, I mean, with Trey McBride being such a start, it's such a highly concentrated volume there. Even though this is a good Vegas matchup for this team, Michael Wilson is still going to be a sit for us as the wide receiver 2 there in Arizona. So again, Ted McMillan in the C tier with Legette and Michael Wilson in the K tier in this matchup. We've got Marvin Harrison Jr. in the B tier after he had 18 points in week 1. Again, a good matchup for Arizona, so we're starting the running backs there. We're going to start Marvin Harrison Jr. and we're going to start Trey McBride, but honestly, the wide receiver 2 is not reliable enough for us to go and say that we are going to make that move this week in our fantasy lineups.
So the wide receiver that we expect to be the most productive in the Denver and Indy matchup is going to be Courtland Sutton. He picked up right where he left off at the end of last season for week 1 this year in a rough game for Bo Nix, but again, Sutton was able to kind of salvage his day with a nice touchdown and some good target volume. Again, we've got him in the B tier this week, but we don't have a viable starting option at the wide receiver position beyond that. Troy Franklin will throw in the J tier, but Marvin Mims is not someone that we're comfortable starting this week. They are playing Indianapolis, who allowed the 11th most amount of points to wide receivers last season, which again is that's gonna be really, really solid, really friendly for Courtland Sutton. I would expect a big week from him. And then looking on the flip side, we're not as comfortable with Michael Pittman this week. We are going to list him as a start because he's coming off of a 20-point game where he established himself as the true wide receiver one in that offense schematically. He was getting more consistent snap share and opportunity than any other wide receiver in that offense over Josh Downs, over Alec Pierce, who had a good year last season. You got yellow lights across the board here for matchup offense in Vegas. I will pump the brakes a little bit with Pittman, though, and say I don't know if I'm going to be as hype on him this week as you could have been in the Miami matchup, because he is going up against a really, really tough matchup with Pat Surtain on the opposite side for Denver. So that's why I'm going to have Josh Downs as a Met, as well as his utilization and snap share just was significantly less than your top two wide receivers there schematically, which were Pittman and Alec Pierce. Downs plays kind of that third wide receiver role, so he's only going to be there in 3 wide receiver sets. And again, he's very efficient with his opportunity, but how often is he going to be on the field consistently? We'll see if that can go up this week. We're going to have him in the I tier for now, though.
Let's go to one of the games of the week, the Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs. Ironically enough, because both these defenses are so good, it's a bad matchup for both of them. But you do still start A.J. Brown, of course, in this matchup, somebody we have in the A tier. You do still start Devonta Smith, somebody we have in the D tier. Both those guys are too good not to start every week. Outside of that, Jahan Dotson's going to be a sit for us on the Eagles side of the ball. And another tough matchup with Kansas City as well. Marquise Brown is going to be a start for us this week, even though it's a tough matchup. I mean, the dude had 16 targets last week, and we're heading into a week where probably Xavier Worthy's not going to play. And so we're going to put Marquise Brown on the depth chart as the wide receiver 1, Juju Smith-Schuster as the wide receiver 2. And honestly, like I'm sitting Juju this week. The Vegas lines aren't that high for this game for both of these teams. And Juju, again, is going to be going into a matchup where the Philadelphia Eagles are very good against fantasy football wide receivers. I think he's going to be more hit or miss, but I don't think he's going to be somebody you want to start in your flex spots because I don't think the upside is going to be there for this week. So, again, a good matchup in terms of entertainment. In terms of fantasy football, there's 3 guys we're starting from a wide receiver standpoint this week, and that's probably it.
When Drake London is going through a day where he's not getting any touchdowns, he still is going to have double digits because he gets 15 targets a week. And that's why we're going to have him in the A tier here. He's a little bit banged up, but we're expecting him to be fine in one of the better matchups in terms of production opportunity in the Atlanta and Minnesota game. I mean, you're looking at both of these sides. Minnesota allowing the most amount of points to wide receiver production last season, and on the flip side you have Atlanta allowing the 5th most amount of points to wide receivers last season and carrying over into week 1 as well. So I think London and Mooney as well, they really looked like they missed Mooney, Atlanta in week 1. So expecting Mooney to come back healthy this week. He was a daytime he was a game day decision, and they ended up deciding to not start him in week 1, and I think they're just going to rest him and have him ready to go for week 2. Justin Jefferson, definitely going to be a must start here. Adam Thielen really didn't do much in his first game back with Minnesota in the last couple of years. I really don't think you're going to be looking at any other viable option in that offense for the foreseeable future until Addison has a chance to come back, and even then, Addison's going to be a little bit shaky until McCarthy can get his passing volume up, because JJ even struggled to produce that much in their first matchup against Chicago in week 1. So hopefully that can go up. We are going to have JJ in the S tier. We're not panicking there either. Adam Thielen in the I tier. If you have to flex him, I guess like that's a last resort one. We're going to have him listed as a sit this week.
Tampa Bay and Houston. These are both yellow and green matchup lights, as both these guys, Tampa Bay was 10th in allowing, Houston was 10th in allowing the most fantasy points wide receiver, and Tampa Bay was 6th. And so when you're looking at the matchups, very good there. Mike Evans in the C tier, still a must start for us. Emeka Egbuka, you can't sit him after what he did last week. He's in the D tier below Mike Evans, and he's a must start for us as well. Interestingly enough, the implied points for Tampa Bay in this matchup from a Vegas line perspective is red. I think part of that is because of what you saw last week with that Houston and LA game kind of becoming a rock fight there. But with that being said, you did still see Puka Nacua produce there. The problem was Devontae Adams was a little bit slow. We still have hope that Emeka Egbuka is going to get enough targets to be relevant in this game. We are going to start him after his awesome week 1 performance. And then on the other side of the ball, the Houston Texans. Nico Collins, we have as a start this week. We have him in the A tier. And then Jaden Higgins, we do have as to sit this week. I don't think Christian Kirk is scheduled to be back, so we don't have him on this graphic. But if he does, Christian Kirk would maybe be a mess start. But Jaden Higgins, the utilization was not there for Higgins. In fact, he wouldn't technically, from a utilization standpoint, even be the wide receiver 2 in Houston yet, even though he could be later in the season. And so because of that, he's going to be in the J tier. He's going to be a sit for us. It is a good matchup for that Houston Texans for those wide receivers, but Nico's really the only one that we're starting. But I would expect a bounce back a week from Nico Collins this week in a good matchup against Tampa Bay.
So looking at our last matchup for this week, you got the Chargers in Vegas. They have the 10 p.m. slate on Monday nights. Lab McConkey we're going to have in the B tier. We expect him to bounce back after really just a non-touchdown week. He saw a good target volume and was fine in what was a surprisingly pass-happy Chargers offense against the Chiefs in week 1. Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnson we're going to have pretty close to each other in the G tier. We're going to have them both as mez this week because it could go either way, honestly. If you want to go with the higher floor of target volume, that would be Keenan Allen. If you want to go with the higher ceiling for the big play upside, that would be QJ. If you want to bet on the touchdowns, you go to QJ. If you want to bet on just, again, efficient volume, you probably want to go with Keenan Allen. So I would lean Keenan Allen. We have him listed as a wide receiver 2 here. I think deservedly so. I generally err on the side of safety and playing the floor this early in the year when a guy like QJ in the past has shown that he can score touchdowns any given week and then have nothing burgers the following week. And again, not to mention this is going to be a tough matchup for them. Vegas allowed the 28th most or the 4th least amount of points to wide receivers last season. And then looking at Jacoby Myers, we got him as a must start. Brock Bowers a little banged up this week. Jacoby Myers had a great week with Geno Smith. This is an upgrade of the quarterback position for this offense compared to what they've been dealing with the last couple of years. Myers was productive with Jacoby or with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback for the last couple of seasons in Gardner Minshew. And now he's got Geno Smith, which is a significant step up. He's going to continue to get that volume. Trey Tucker and Dante Thornton will both rank in the K tier. They got some volume. They got some opportunity. Trey Tucker actually had a touchdown, which kind of boosted his production in week 1. But again, that volume is not going to be consistent for either of these guys.
So again, if you want us to just send you your lineup with all the Vegas lights and what your recommended lineup is based on our algorithm, you can do that. Again, the season pass with code DOMAIN. We're offering this for our season pass holders. We have Sleeper right now, ESPN and Yahoo we're going to have next week. And so you can sign up again with the season pass using code DOMAIN at the link in the comments. But if you do us a huge favor, if you enjoy the video, make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed. Also, we're going to have this for you every single week. We can tell you who to start, sit, and you're going to get this in your feed if you're subscribed before all of your league mates and make sure that you're making the right lineup decisions every single week. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later.